everybody. My name's Ian. Today I am discussing this vampire witch illustration. Um, with a piece like this, where I'm dealing with a lot of library stuff, a lot of books, I tend to like to do these as pencil illustrations, like the ones I'm showing on the screen right now, rather than ink illustration or strictly digital. In fact, the one that's currently on the screen, I'm also did a color version of it, very much in the same style that I'll be doing with this later on. Um, the concept was essentially this spell casting vampire sitting in or kneeling in a library style space. Um, and I had uh, reached out to a friend of mine, Zoe. She had modeled for some other pieces of mine, including a couple of videos back, the steampunk scientist pencil illustration. Um, and between a sketch that I put together initially and photograph of her, I put together the completed concept with this piece. I'm using 11 inch by 17-inch Strathmore Bristol 100-pound weight paper. Um, this is a smooth surface. The initial layout was done with a 2H pencil. Didn't really put too much of it onto the screen because it doesn't tend to get picked up very well by the camera. Um, but the first main pass that I'm doing right now is with a 2B pencil. A little bit darker than what I was doing with the background in that steampunk scientist piece, where with that, the entire background was done uniformly with an HB pencil. It was with an HB mechanical pencil, but a little bit wider than the traditional one. They're usually a zero point 0.5 millimeter width, and I was using a zero point 0.7, so it was just a little bit softer, a little bit darker. With this piece, though, I wanted much richer backgrounds and a much richer, darker feel all the way through. So most of my work on this is being done with a 2H pencil, and then later on I'll be switching over to a 6H for a much even darker and softer feel. The overall setting, as I said, was this library, and I do tend to like to use libraries, bookshelves, and books themselves for settings and props in a lot of pieces. Quite often, a lot of supernatural pieces, I find that all of that tends to blend together really, really well. Libraries make an excellent setting for that, very similar to how I also like doing supernatural pieces set in the woods. In both cases, I'm dealing with a wooden background, chiefly wooden bookshelves, in leather-bound books and whatnot. It gets a nice organic feel that works well with supernatural subject matter. And I find for my work that pencil illustrations seem to work with that really well. I get a much more organic feel using pencils. If I wanted to do something um, a bit more science fictiony, I will lean more into doing either full inks or ink and color, or just go for full digital illustration. Um, but but yeah, for something like this, I've done a lot of these in the past. These supernatural pieces uh, with a darker pencil, establishing this moody, atmospheric tone all the way through. Um, but with this one being a vampire as a subject matter, and she's doing kind of a blood magic ritual or something, I did want there to be little splashes of color here and there. And I could have done this piece as a colored pencil illustration. I used to do those quite a bit, but instead I decided with this one I wanted to do full pencils and then do more of a color tinting than some of my other full color pieces. At the very least, a very limited palette, keeping it all to very warm tones. Honestly, the coolest, from a color temperature point of view, aspect of this illustration will be the central character, her skin tones, and her outfit. Whereas with her hair, it'll be a very similar shade of red to any of the blood that will be in the piece. But yeah, keeping a very limited palette. And I've done this in the past where the past few Halloweens, I'll do some folk horror pieces, keeping it a very simple purple and green color palette. In much the same way that some of the cyberpunk pieces I do, I'll keep a very simple red and blue color palette. So there's a lot of contrast in there without getting bogged down in too many complex colors. And this piece seemed to be very appropriate for that. So I'm moving mostly moving from left to right on this illustration. As I discussed in the uh, steampunk scientist piece, while my traditional method, my initial composition I tend to do from the central character outward, essentially drawing it from front to back. For most of my painting, inking, I do like inking from back to front so that I can leave a lot of color decisions, a lot of lighting decisions on the main character for last. However, with something like very soft pencils, it seems to work better if I simply just do everything from left to right. Being right-handed, that means I'm not going to be dragging my hand over these soft pencils on the page and smearing everything. So that's simply from a practical point of view. So I'd started in the upper left-hand corner, coming down for that first set of bookshelves, outlining the main character's arm and blood coming down off of her arm, and a little bit of outlining of her outfit here, but also building up the background. So there's some extra depth there. We've already got, so the first set of bookshelves, the deepest set of bookshelves in the image, with another lower bookshelf, something you would usually see for more reference material, such as rows of encyclopedias, that you could then open up on top of the bookshelf and read very easily. Although in this instance, you can actually see there's a figure back there. So it's acting almost like an altar. I'm keeping it a little bit subtle. The blood coming down off of that altar, and I'm actually want to maintain that all the way through the image. That it's not being hidden, but it is a more subtle thing. It's still working to push focus towards the main character. So, for instance, the blood coming off of that figure in the background and down the sides of that shelf won't be colored. They'll just be left in the same warm tones as the woods, the wood stuff around it, the wooden elements in the area, other bookshelves, that very beaten up chair, other books laying on the ground. Um, so I'm still kind of working from back to front, concentrating heavily on the deep background, doing as little as I could on the main figure until I absolutely have to get to the next section, and I don't want to end up smearing anything around her. So it's better for me to go ahead and work on detailing her. But now I'm working down the page, all the way down the left-hand side, so I'm getting much more into the wooden floor, and various other things on this floor. So the open books, or the books laying around, this kind of pentagram circle thing that she's kneeling on, that's been created on the floor, that's been drawn out. Um, just keeping to that same, working from left to right, uh, mostly just to make sure again that I'm not smearing any of the pencils. Another thing I'm keeping in mind is the the background is being done darker overall than the foreground, but individual elements in the foreground will be darker than the background. What do I mean by that? Essentially, the background I want to have almost an overall gray feeling. There is a lot of detail back there, but so much of it is in shadow that it very much falls behind everything. Whereas the central figure will have a lot more contrast. The pants that she's wearing, once I get to those, will be much darker than any of the dark shadows in the deep background. But it'll also be contrast against how there'll be very little shading on the skin tones of the character, and even the shirt that she's wearing. Because I know I want to make it very light, I am putting in some shading on it. It's still going to be very, very light, very subtle shading, so that she will definitely pop out of the frame. And some of the other elements in the deep foreground around her are doing the same thing. This candlestick, for example, the base of the candlestick goes generally darker than the deep background, but there are also spots of white all the way through it. So there's contrast within the candlestick holder, within the candlestick itself, and then, of course, the bright flame above the candle, which is almost completely white. So that adds a lot more contrast into the foreground images, which help pull them forward in the frame. I've drawn out the foot, her right leg and right foot. The pants design I found was I found an interesting one where the upper half of her pants were just basically flat leather, but it was kind of a fishnet, a very dense fishnet pattern below that for the rest of the pants. So I decided I would draw that out first. So there's no real shading on the lower half of her leg. All that whole pattern on there is actually just the crisscross fishnet pattern of the lower half of her pants. And now, because I'm working from left to right, I can start detailing the face of the main character. This will also be very high contrast because I'm just going to be putting in the details around her eyes, nose, and mouth, but I won't be filling in any shading on her face. My intent is to leave a little bit of that, leave it very open so I can do a little bit of shading when I go to the color process. But even that is going to be very minimal compared to, say, the Cybergoth and Narcology inks to digital color illustration I did, where with that illustration, I left the artwork, all the line art for the skin tones and the character very open, but I was using very high contrast colors, and I put in a lot of detail with the colors. Whereas with this, it's going to be very minimal contrast within the colors, very minimal contrast, showing the direction of the two different lights being cast on her. It's almost as though she's absorbing light, given her supernatural nature. Wanted to make sure that she was extremely pale. The model is already fairly pale, but this character would even be more so. Her shirt will be almost a silvery white shirt, so it'll have a little bit more contrast than her skin tones, but not by a whole lot. So it'll blend well, it'll contrast well with her pants. That'll all stand out very strongly from the background. Her hair, I'm putting in a lot of detail, but I know because I'm going to be making it fairly red in the final color process, it'll still separate from the background. But I do want to make sure there's enough white space, enough contrast, enough space between the dark and the light in her hair that it will still stand alone. Like with all of these pieces, whether I'm doing a pencil illustration that's going to be colored or an ink illustration that's going to be colored, the original pencil or ink illustration needs to be able to stand on its own as a finished piece of work, a finished illustration. The color process is just an additional step to create almost like it's creating something new, but I still much prefer that I'm not drawing things as though they're just pages for a coloring book that must be colored. I want the color to accentuate things, but not to be the be-all and end-all, the whole point of the illustration. Especially with something like this, where, I want to do almost a color tinting compared to some of my other illustrations. So it's not going to be as strong. The color won't be focused quite as strongly as it will be in some of the other pieces. Now that most of the upper torso is completed, continuing on into the background behind her, going from left to right, finishing up that central bookshelf, central bookcase behind her. I've said many times about how both bookshelves and brickwork are some of my favorite things to draw because it creates such an immediate sense of scale and depth in an illustration. The fact that you have these parallel lines that as soon as you twist the direction that they're facing, they immediately give you a sense of distance, a sense of perspective. And there's not much. These are not twisted very far. Um, like these bookshelves are only they're almost parallel, or they're almost perpendicular to the viewer. They're almost facing towards the viewer, but I have them tilted just slightly, so you get the sense that you can go behind whatever's in the foreground, just to the right of all those bookshelves. That you could walk around that corner and continue down that hallway into more and more rows of bookshelves. You get the same effect with brickwork. If you're drawing an urban setting, drawing brick structures, very easy to create that sense of depth when you're using bricks to be able to create those sort of perspective lines that just draw the eye and draw the imagination of the viewer to infer a much larger space behind what's uh, viewable on the illustration. Now I'm switching over to the 6B pencil to start working on the pants, both to instantly make them darker, um, but frankly also to make it a little bit easier on my hands. You notice I'm wearing my a pressure glove to deal with my arthritis for most of this illustration, and working with darker, softer pencils definitely helps with that. Then I'm not putting as much pressure down. Um, as black as the original design of the pants was that I found, I did want to make them a little bit lighter, just so that I could indicate a better sense of the direction of light in the illustration. Um, so they have a lot of contrast. They stand out well from the shirt and from everything, all the other elements of the figure. Uh, Possibly the blood around her seems a little bit darker. So um, it still works really well for that sense of contrast, but adds just a little bit more depth or a little bit more interest into the figure. Shows her musculature a little bit more. Um, it's not just a flat black piece with perhaps a sharp spike of white along one side to show where the light is coming from. Um, I do that more in the cyberpunk style pieces I do, where I want to go with even higher contrast leathers. The very nature of this piece being very soft and organic, it just makes me feel that even the darkest shadows, I want to soften them a little bit to continue the overall tone of the piece. Um, so then I completed the third set of bookshelves a little bit further forward in space and tilting them a little bit more. So it also adds to that sense of depth, um, with another chair and a second lower bookshelf that I have this very large crystal ball. My original idea was it was going to be a globe sitting on the bookshelf, but I realized I hadn't really put a reflective surface into the image yet. And I love working with reflective surfaces, both metal and glass, mirrors, anything like that. So I wanted to have a little bit of that in this piece. Very soft one, it's not overwhelming, um, and it certainly is appropriate for the setting. It still gives a soft feel because it's reflecting rows and rows of books. And now we're getting more into the foreground. So now I've got the bulk of the deeper background completed. All this, everything surrounding um, the upper portion of the illustration, everything on the left-hand side of the illustration. Now I'm getting into this whole collection of books on the floor in front of her, this bowl that's sitting in front of her, the rest of the pentagram circle. Just continuing this whole witch component. Um, don't tend to see a lot of illustrations of vampires themselves casting spells. It tends to be one or the other. They tend to either be a spellcaster or a vampire. Um, But there is precedent for this. I'm a long-time player of the game Vampire the Masquerade, and there's a whole clan of vampires in that are primarily spellcasters. So this absolutely works with that kind of idea. Um, Also, just wanting an overall Halloweeny style feel. I was doing this mid-October 2025 is the second last illustration I was getting done before Halloween. The last one is a bit more. It veers into a bit more of the kitschy Halloween. Um, and I should actually be posting a video of that after this one. That just a black and white ink illustration. But for this one, I still wanted to have that horror vibe, but in a bit more of a Halloween soft horror, um, more of a fun thing with a few references on some of the books to my own gaming history, my own history in playing supernatural role playing games and just fun pop culture things. The fact that the book that I'm drawing at the moment is titled King in Yellow is itself a reference to a few different fun supernatural gags, both from pop culture and from gaming, and continuing the continuing the wooden floor underneath her. I will be adding in more shadow just to kind of isolate the light um, coming from that candle, that freestanding candle on the floor. But still wanting to need to build up the basic pattern over the whole floor, the basic wood grain, and then go in afterwards and start deepening it on one side to get more of a sense of shadow, more sense of light and dark. Um, but also casting shadows from the books that are directly in front of her, having the one book sitting open, propped up on top of another one. I like that kind of tactile feel of interlocking elements, making it feel like each of the books are separate entities, but they are in this larger piece. I want to make sure that it doesn't feel like it's a bunch of floating images, but things have weight. The book is sitting on the open book is sitting on top of the closed book. It's casting a shadow differently on the book than it is on the floor underneath. And here we have the finished pencil illustration. Now this piece was scanned in 3 pieces. As I said, it was done in 11 by 17, 11 inches by 17 inches, scanned on an 8.5 by 11 inch flatbed scanner, and then composed into a single larger image so I could paint it. I do have another video that shows my process for scanning larger pieces to doing small scans of larger pieces, and then how I assemble them all together. Normally, when I am coloring one of these pieces, I will actually separate various elements onto their own layers and color them like that. With this one, though, because I wanted to do it as a very simple paint scheme, again, more tinting than actual painting, all of the painting on this is being done behind the line art layer, but only on a single layer. It's just completely freehand painted, and I'm not making any selections. Very little in the way of gradients as well. I'm just using a couple of different types of paintbrushes, and then started in the deepest background um, with a bit of a grayer warm tone. But as it moves forward in space, it warms up a little bit. So, for instance, the low bookshelf that the figure is laying on in front of the deeper bookshelf is a little bit warmer. It's a little bit redder than that deeper bookshelf. And then the bookshelf in front of that is also a little bit darker and warmer. Using that to basically separate the planes of the illustration. Just to enhance what I'd already established with the original line art. No, not doing any coloring that is radically changing the mood of the piece. This is all going with it. Strictly sticking to all these warm tones until I get to the main figure, where I'm starting to add in much cooler tones on her pants and then on her skin tone and shirt, with the exception of her hair. I do want that to pop, and I want it to pop with the same kind of color that I'll be using in all the blood. That seems to work well with a vampire kind of idea. And frankly, it works really well with it's a good reference to the model. The fact that Zoe has red hair in many photos that I've taken of her over the years. You can see here I'm using exactly the same color. So not the richest red. I've certainly done illustrations where I painted the reds on blood a whole lot more saturated, a lot more intense. But given the nature of this being very soft, I wanted to keep it a fairly soft color, a very soft red, but it still stands out strongly from all the colors behind it because everything, again, it's mostly just kind of a tinting than more than anything else. Not extremely dark colors at all. Um, Hand painting in this bluish, this very cool gray on her skin tone and on her shirt, and then going in and painting brighter and brighter colors to pull it forward a little bit to change the texture of the shirt as compared to the skin tones. I mean, one thing that changes the texture between the two is that there's more pencil shading on the shirt. There's almost no pencil shading on the main character. But the colors I'm choosing to paint the character versus the shirt will also help them separate a little bit more. It'll be a bit more obvious a little bit later once I get to the brighter highlights on the shirt. That'll create a bit more, as you can see here, almost a shinier feel, and it doesn't go quite as shiny on the central character herself. But yeah, just keeping with this very soft, not not overly complicated coloring scheme. Not this over not I'm not overcomplicating the color. Essentially, I want it to just I want the color in this to be secondary to all of the light and shadow decisions that were made in the pencil portion of the illustration. Again, I don't want to overwhelm anything. I'm just wanting to enhance it, make it pop just a little bit more. Getting onto adding that gray onto her foot to remind you that, yep, that's absolutely part of the main character. Carry that through underneath that mesh, that kind of fishnet lower half of her pants. And again, normally these will all be done on separate layers. All the various elements. The shirt would be done on a separate layer, the skin tones on a separate layer, the hair's on a separate layer. But for this one, I I almost want the colors to blend into each other just a little bit to give it a little bit hazy, dreamlike quality. That works with the subject matter. It works with the style of penciling I did. And you can see behind her hair, I did not add any sort of additional red tones to the blood coming down off of that bookshelf to make sure that the bookshelf is separated, that it's further behind her, that it's not. If you look, you can see what's happening. But the focus of the image is the main character. It's not necessarily the environment she's in. It's not the other elements in there. So I'm wanting the viewer to be taken in by the main character. And then as the viewer continues to look at the piece, they're going to find more information. They're going to find more details here and there. You know, if they start studying the books, they start studying the difference between the different bookshelves, and then, oh wait, there's something on this particular bookshelf back here. So that it's there's layers of discovery, I suppose. Um, Working uh, on the candlestick holder and the books here. I'm going to be separating the color of the pentagram a little bit as well. Make it separate just a touch from the floor. And now, of course, adding in a much bolder yellow. And it's not so much that it's going to be bolder. It's still a very light color, but it's a much purer yellow than the other warm tones in the environment. So so now, because there's nothing in the environment that goes to white, the flame isn't going to go to white either. But it's still very light and a very distinct warm tone from everything else. Now, and adding in that slightly lighter tone on the pentagram there, and now we have the finished illustration. Thank you very much for hanging out and looking at this one, and hope to see you in my next illustration discussion video.